So I want to introduce Cheryl Brown, landscape architect specializing in residential landscape architecture here in the upstate. And I am the former owner of Earth Design. And in 2008, I hired Cheryl Brown to come work for me at Earth Design. As a firm that specialized in native plants and native plant design, Cheryl was a perfect fit for us. A lot of times I had people come and work for me, and it might take me a while to get them into the native bug, I guess, get them acclimated to, oh no, we don't use the juga. we use green and gold. And so, use what? And so I didn't have to say any of that to Cheryl. She already knew the plants. She knew exactly how to use them. And she is a wonderful designer. And so she has a degree in horticulture from Clemson University and a master's in landscape architecture from the University of Georgia, where I went to school as well. And so Cheryl's going to do a great presentation. And I consider her the premier residential landscape designer and landscape architect in the upstate. Cheryl, come on up and give us a good time. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Got a presentation that's going to take us through the steps that we go through in the residential design process. And so my hope for you today is that you can kind of see that process and glean some of those ideas to be able to apply in your residential home scale garden. And I know that everybody is in a different place with their personal space. Maybe you've got new construction and a builder landscape that came with the house. Maybe you're in a wooded location. So the application and the plant communities that you are going to need to seek out are going to be different in each of those applications. But the design process is a little bit more consistent, and kind of the way to think about a space and the things that you need to consider. And so we'll just kind of walk through that, and as we get to the end, we'll be able to take questions. And if you have like, how to apply this, or are there considerations, anything that I've missed during this presentation, be happy to chat about those. All right, and thank you for the intro, Rick. That was great. You remembered all the stuff. Yeah, good. And so at Earth Design, I will say that we do kind of have a twofold company where my business partner focuses on the commercial designs, municipal designs, park designs, public designs, and then I focus on the residential side, and we do the design and the installation. And so the design process consists of a number of steps, starting with program development, site inventory, analysis of what you have on your site. And then the real meat of it comes in that preliminary design step, where what you've kind of done all your gathering of information, then throwing ideas around and pushing and pulling, and how can I look at the space? And I've been looking at this yard the same way for so long. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes comes in and sees things a little differently. And so that's part of the fun of having consultations or working with designers or friends that like gardening. And then, you kind of develop those plans, and then hone in on the plant palette that makes sense for the space that you've created. And then installation is the fun part. So I'm going to deep dive into each of these steps, and hopefully share some graphics and some things that will get you thinking. Step one, anytime we start a design with a new client, the first thing we do is program development. We do a consultation on site, and we walk around and we say, what are your dreams? What do you want to do in this space? What do you love? What do you envision? What's your Pinterest board look like? Is it all shade gardens? Is it bright, sunny perennial meadows? Is it lots of play space for kids? Is there a temporal element to it? Like what I need right now, which might be large open lawn for people to run and tumble and play, but later I want to develop that into a more intense garden space. Do you want to grow food? Do you want to hang out by the bonfire? So we talk about all these ideas, and so we try to get people to either personally create a vision board, or, we sometimes provide some ideas and some fodder for like thoughts and ways that you can envision your space. And try to think long-term and big picture, not just what can I handle this year, what do I want right now, but when we think larger scale, we can then get the big ideas together, put things in the right places, and execute it bit by bit. You don't have to do it all at once, but it's really nice to have that cohesive plan and then pick off the pieces one by one. So where do we start? Where do you start? And it's base information. Where are your property lines? What does your lot look like? What's the slope? What's the aspect? Are we north facing, south facing? Do you have water runoff problems? Is water coming from the street? Is it coming from your backdoor neighbor? What does the drainage look like? So I like to start using Greenville County, if you're in Greenville County, Oconee County, Pickens County, GIS, in order to get that first blush of the space. Now you can link through to the Register of Deeds, and maybe there's a plat online, which is more accurate than what you're seeing here with this aerial, because a lot of times those property lines that you see don't actually line up with the photograph, and the actual property line is 2 feet that way, 3 feet that way. So if you're going to get more serious, if you have a difficult site, if you are in a municipality that has stormwater regulations and we're having to capture off of new hardscape, then going to the next level and doing a survey of your property that really has exact property boundaries, house, drive, walls, patios, buildings, fences, overhead power lines, utility easements, all that good stuff, and topography, trees. So sometimes that's the right idea if you've got a larger property or a more complex design that you want to execute over time. If you're looking out of your back door at a small yard and that's it, you can probably skip these steps and just do some on-site measuring. So once we kind of gather the base information, our next step is what we call the site inventory. And depending on what we've gathered that already exists, we might have a lot of this data already, and then sometimes we don't. Sometimes we come out with a blank sheet of paper and we start measuring the house and we pull off and we go to the fence lines, and it's going to be a case-by-case basis and how intense, how much information you need. But no matter what, starting with what's there, what you want to keep, what might be something you could let go of, what wants to be transplanted to a new home or a new location, that's all very important initial data that you should start with. Where are your drainage problems? Are your downspouts piped? Do you have downspouts? Do you have water coming off your roof and more of a sheet flow? Do you have water in your basement? So we kind of talk about all these things as far as our information gathering at the beginning in order to understand what's there and how we can go from where we are to a design that is more helpful, useful, fun, functional, all of those things. Then we take that information and we analyze it. Sun, shade, soil fertility, slopes and grades, what we want to keep, what are our limitations, what are our constraints, what are the HOA regulations? Depending on the situation, there might be a lot of different things that you have to deal with. You might have a sewer easement or a REWA, stormwater easement in your backyard that you don't know about until you do a little digging and investigation. But those are things that would limit what you can develop in those spaces. And so having all that data and analyzing them, information kind of starts to come to the surface about the areas that work and can be developed, the areas that need to be lower intensity, higher intensity, and we go from there. So then it gets fun. Say use a scaled base map. That means it doesn't matter what scale it is, as long as you know that 1 inch equals 10 feet, 20 feet, 5 feet, whatever your scale is that fits on a piece of paper that you can use. And then we push through with rough sketches, pencil ideas. We burn through them fast. We're spatial arrangement. We are thinking about the elements that a client wants, and the sizes of these things and how they play. And those ideas start to coalesce, and we say, oh, we like this one. This one's going in the trash can. What about this? Turn it upside down, flip it backwards. And so what we really want to do during this preliminary design process is run through a lot of spatial arrangements and develop the ideas. It's hard to see a site in a different way. It's hard to see a driveway that's there and think, how could this driveway be different? How could the space be redeveloped? But you really just have to push the ideas and vet the ideas, and a few usually rise to the surface and you feel like they're really good. You weigh out the pros and cons. You think about how the space has worked and what goals the client has and if they meet them. And you can really take one space in a lot of different ways. So I'm showing you, I'm going to flip back through these just now that this is a preliminary level landscape plan that we would present to a client. And you can see that there are some very different ways to think about that same space. But the elements that we're putting in that landscape plan are very similar each time. We know we want a pool. We know we want a play set. We know we need a cabana. We need better access to the front door. We'd really like a koi pond. We need a greenhouse and a large garden space. And so there are so many different ways that we can configure these ideas, and the same idea of this multi-element design can be applied on a smaller scale in any type setting. And we definitely try to force those alternative ideas. Think through the pros and cons, determine the favorite elements, and then this little thing called budgets that we also do. So you can always space things out. These guys are gonna have a pool. They will. Did we build it the first round? No. But did we structure the space so we can come back and do it later? Absolutely. We also, at this point during preliminary design, start playing with material ideas. We start playing with stone steps, flagstone pathways, paver pathways. How are we building these elements? And we start kind of those images that I showed at the beginning, we start kind of thinking through materials and how the space feels. We get after this point into the more detailed planning. And this is something that if you're just kind of doing this on your own, you're going to skip this hard line drawing. You're going to work off that idea, but then you want to get out in the yard and really put it on the ground, because even after doing this for 20 years, sometimes you get out there and you're like, well, I just didn't draw that in the right place. We got to go 2 feet that way. It just doesn't feel right in the space, in the 3-dimensional space. So there's always a little push and pulling, a little tweaking. I never feel like that piece of paper is the end all be all, because that paper is beautifully flat and that site might really be like that, tilted sideways. So use marking paints, use flags, use an old water hose, lay it out, look at the bed lines, walk through the space, and adjust as needed for real life conditions. Key things that I think about during this process, both preliminary and final, are how I move through the space as a homeowner, as a user of the space, as a person who's going to be there. Circulation, places to rest, hardscape in general, those seating nooks, those places to stop and enjoy the garden are so important to the space. I'm not just talking all plants today. Planting design is almost its own beast, and those flyers that you guys got today, I mean, that's such a good reference. You're considering a lot of things when you get into the planting design, but first, before you get into where does the plant go, how does the space feel? Where am I stopping and resting? Where am I moving? What are my desire lines? Do I need to get from point A to point B? Am I always going to that water hose? I'm not going to put anything in front of it. You know, we really have to think about how we move through the space and how we can create resting points and movement points. And then your more intensive plantings, things that require a little bit more TLC, like those vegetable gardens, putting them using permaculture principles and kind of bringing those closer to the house, the higher intensity elements. And then the things that are further out take less care, less effort, less input. They just kind of are out there in the periphery, kind of see the space and layers of intensity. And so once we do have all that structural stuff figured out, then we get into that planting development. And plant communities are key. And in order to determine those plant communities, we are thinking sun and shade. We are thinking wet or dry. We are thinking soil, underlying soil type, soil conditioning. And as I design spaces, I work from the larger elements down to the smaller elements. What do I need for overhead shade? Where does that fit? What do I need to screen that view to the neighbor that I really, you know, just want to obscure slightly? And what plants allow me to kind of create pivot points in the garden? What plants allow me to close off a space and create some mystery to fit, you know, that create a space that there's something behind it, but you don't know what it is until you get there. So I like to place the big plants first. I like to think about those larger plants and then work down to the smaller perennials, ground covers, bits and pieces. Straight species or cultivar, it's probably on everybody's mind. And I think it is absolutely client dependent and intent driven. I think that we find that there are cultivars that do not provide the same wildlife value. And then we find that there are cultivars that seem to act relatively similar in the beneficial insects that they attract. We like to think a lot of times with our planting design is we're just kind of turning up the volume a little bit on a particular plant that we want to showcase in an area. And it may or may not be exactly how you would find it in a natural system, but we're highlighting it. We're in a garden, we're in our space. This is man-made. We are creating this. Now we're going to put things in there that are going to support the environment and that are going to support wildlife, but we can still have fun while we do it. And if you want a funky wild color echinacea, do it. Do it. If it's your color, love it. If it accents with that planter, you know, have some fun with it as well. But there are times and places where straight species are very appropriate and needed, and a lot of our restoration work on a more a larger scale, I feel like that but has more gravity at that point. But on a home scale, you want to enjoy it every day, and you want to pick flowers that are the right colors that you want to bring in and have in your bouquet. So play with it and have fun. Sourcing on a wholesale scale is challenging. Here, I'm sharing some sources that are wonderful for residential scale. My challenge is I can't get what I want in a high enough quantity for the number of houses that I install in a year. But the more we push and the more we ask and the more we call those traditional garden centers and say, hey, do you have this native? Hey, do you have buttonbush? Hey, do you have lavandera? Hey, you know, the more they hear us as a community of people who want native plants, the more they kind of start paying attention and bringing the sourcing in. So I'm a squeaky wheel. And I'm like, come on, you can find it. It's got to be somewhere. Please get it for me. You need to grow it. We need it. So sometimes we make some sacrifices occasionally, but we do have a lot of great vendors. And if clients are willing to be more patient, we can always get the seeds. We can always get the plugs. 4 inches pots are very available. But if you want that instant gratification that a lot of people want in a new landscape, finding those larger specimens of the natives and having them as robust as some of the other available species is still a challenge in our industry. So that is probably the hardest thing that I run up against and how I do my planting design for individuals. But let's talk a little bit more plants. So as I mentioned, you're thinking sun and shade, you're thinking the environment that you want to create. Are we open and are we dry? Do we have pockets of moisture where the landforms allow drainage to go, where we have a little microclimate and when it otherwise hot and arid situation? We can use so many wonderful meadow plants, Piedmont prairie plants that can work in these drier environments. And if you're one of those that really doesn't want to do the irrigation and that's your goal, then this is more the plant palette you're going to want to lean to. And don't, try to force things that want sunny and wet in a sunny and dry environment. These are some of our structural elements, some chokeberry, American beautyberry, viburnums, sumac, and fringe tree. So these are kind of our structural shrubs, those things that give us some mass, that step down from a woodland edge down to a mid-story down to the meadow. And the chokeberry, which is that bright red leaf in the top right corner with the purple blueberry, that's a cultivar, but it's absolutely gorgeous in the fall. It's autumn magic, and it really performs and lives up to its name.
Which viburnum is that?
That is the dentatum, Viburnum dentatum, and that is the blue muffin variety. So again, not straight species. And I think overall, the plant breeders are breeding smaller plants for our garden scale landscapes, right? A lot of the native species left to their own devices would be 8, 10, 12 feet tall, and they're crossing and finding ways to get those down so we can enjoy the benefits of them visually, but with a smaller scale. It's just the general direction that I feel like I'm seeing the industry move. Then we have those areas that are sunny but have a higher moisture gradient, areas where maybe you're capturing the stormwater runoff and you can create a rain garden or a bog garden, and you can have plants that really want the wet feet without the irrigation. So on the bottom left, we have a bog garden that has a combination of things that maybe you wouldn't even think about being that wet, like the Tradescanthia with the purple flower there, kind of hanging out with some pitcher plants. And then we have the green-headed coneflower and our native hibiscus, the Joe Pye weed, and the cardinal flower. So lots of resources on these communities and how these plants can work together, and planting in that everything together in the similar environment. We have our shady woodlands. We lean a lot on the carex. There are lots of varieties of carex out there, going from a more dry mesic to a more moisture loving. There are different heights that you can get. I mean, just the varieties are pretty fantastic. And we, in the middle, of course, have our trillium and Rick's absolute favorite, green and gold. Yeah. And we like to pair that with that little purple crested iris down on the bottom left a lot of times, because that's how we find it when we walk in the woods. Tradescanthia, the other purple flower in the bottom, and Christmas fern and columbine. These are just some of our favorites. There's so many. This was really hard. It was really hard to pick the plants to put on the slideshow, or we'd be here for like 2 hours just talking plants. So there are just so many references and so many places that you can kind of start learning these plants. One of the trickier pieces in our native deciduous forest is evergreens that carry you through the winter, because when we walk in the woods, what do we see? American hollies for the most part. And then we can get into the rhododendrons if we're far enough up towards the mountains. But I've been leaning a good bit on the red anise, which is not exactly native, so I'm not a total purist, but it's a great shade-loving evergreen shrub that I feel like has been performing extremely well. And that's the far left plant, and it has, don't eat it, it's not that anise or anise, as some people call it. And then its cousin, the Florida Sunshine, can give you a pop of color in a dense understory. The rainbow Leucothaway is there in the bottom middle. That is cultivar of the Leucothaway fontanesiana, and has a lot of character and a lot of interest. So these are the ones that I'm kind of playing with, turning up the volume, might be stepping outside of the box a little bit with the strict natives. But, and then of course our native azalea, couldn't not put that in, right? So I'm going to move into a few projects and just kind of go back through those steps that we talked about and kind of give you some visuals on a little bit of start to finish. Trying to do some things that are small that maybe feel like something you've seen, a friend's house, your house. This is a drainage corridor in a tiny yard, a tiny lot. Guess what we realized? That fence is not on the property line. She had 7 more feet of property. So guess what we did? We moved the fence. But I mean, a desolate place. She just moved in. She said, we've got to fix this. This is not working. So we came out, we mapped, we did our site inventory. We found that that fence was not where it needed to be. During the course of this project, we lost some trees, as I imagine many of you might have lost some trees. And our sunshade context in our personal yards possibly changed because of Helene. And so we had to pivot in the middle of this and change plant palette from a shady plant palette to a sunny plant palette. But the ideas and the layouts and the concepts remained the same. So we're thinking about that space in multiple ways. We know she's a family member that has mobility issues. And so once we discussed that at the second meeting, we just decided we were not going to go with individual flagstones, that we needed a consistent, smooth pathway with that had ramps and no steps. So we developed these, and I should have zoomed in, and I'm sorry. Point up to the top right, you can see how that layout developed, and we ended up expanding the patio spaces from what we originally said, just to give more outdoor seating, because this is it. That's all they have, that little backyard nook. And then we added the planting plan once we had the hardscape developed. You know, first, what are we doing with the hardscape? And then let's get the plants in there. And so then what do? We do the layout. We get it, we flag it, just like I suggested that you flag it. Where is it going? How does it fit? Do we need to make changes? And how is this going to go in that space? And it seems really snug, but it actually, and then we start the install. And we were thinking about drainage at the same time, and we ended up, you know, we kind of guiding that water, thinking about how that water's flowing off of the hard surfaces into a little dry stream that took it down the back. There's a large storm drain that it ultimately was going into. So we were just kind of guiding it that way, and kind of created these little elements for them, a swing, a water feature that they wanted to have, and a seating note down beyond. Now, this is really fresh based on the timeline that I just shared with you, so it's going to take some time to grow in. But we really took a very desolate space and created a very usable space. And as this fills in over time, those hardscape edges get softened with the plants. And I often feel like a strong hardscape will allow for a messy, wild, wonderful plant palette over time. You know, if you only have the messy, wild, wonderful plant palette, it's harder for some people to appreciate that. You know, that appearance of care, that edge, that this is taken care of. Sometimes just a mow strip at the front of the property and then the wild just is enough to say, hey, look, taking care of it. It's what I wanted to do. And then that's a view from the back where we were kind of capturing that stormwater and wrapping it around. And to do a little grading to level out that patio space, but because we had shot the grades and looked at that initially, we knew that that was coming. Oh, another before. I showed you this one earlier. Open, sunny landscape with plantings that the client worked on and put in and was excited about and had built over time, but she just said, I want a shade garden. I want a shade garden. She just did not want this grass, right? So we looked at a lot of pictures, we talked through a lot of visions, and we talked about the fact that there's going to have to be some patience with creating a shade garden in a full, open, sunny backyard. But we put the shape in place so it could happen. And what we did acknowledge is that rear wood line did provide some shade. And so we had the ability to even go ahead and get some of those wonderful shade plants that she wanted along the fence while the other shade trees kind of came into being. But so what did we do? Typical steps. We did our site inventory. Her house is at the top of the screen, and we mapped out exactly the fence line. We knew we were working inside of that. We even mapped some of the things that were exterior of the fence, even though that was all property, just to know what we had. We mapped her drainage situation, noted the elements, the sculptural elements that she had, so we could work them back into the space. And then we came up with conceptual designs. I like to give clients two choices. Ultimately, we go through probably 5 to 10 ideas that we feel like we like, and then we have to hone it in and get it down. I mean, you can overwhelm somebody if you're like, here are your 10 options of things that we could do with your yard. So we try to really get it down to kind of the top ones that we feel. We try to do 2, but this one was like, no, we need to do the 3rd one. We really had an idea that we wanted to share at the same time. And so we shared some images of how we saw this developing. And this is a little more manicured, and that was the style the client wanted. So we can have, as you can probably see in these bottom images, they're a little bit more neat and tidy than maybe a traditional wild native plant garden, but we can use native plants no matter how formal the design is. It can be a very formal, structured, hardscape layout, and we can still bring in those ecosystem services by providing plants that support the native wildlife. So after talking, pushing pros and cons, back and forth, discussions and decisions, we honed in on a design that then included a very tiny, cute garden shed. And as you can see from this plan on the right, we greatly reduced her lawn, which was the goal. The left side is more of the hardscape layout before the planting is applied, so that when we get out on site, we know exactly how things lay out and what the structure is. There is usually a demo and removal plan as well, because there are a lot of things that we want to transplant and save. They're a great plant, but they're just not in the right place for the ultimate goal of the design. And so then we did the next step, which is lay it out on site. How does it feel? Do we need to push and pull these lines any? Do we feel good about the remaining circulation when we start cutting this grass? Because once we cut it, not putting it back, it's gone. And then we started excavating, we started soil amending, we started creating some elevation to the yard, because it was just a flat slope. And so we decided we wanted to kind of create some terraces with it. And then we started building it back. So we ended up installing a retaining wall and a little seating area. You can see the trees that are going in that will ultimately be those shade trees. And then again, I just wanted to pop back to the before. South is to my right, to the fence line. So those trees were casting good shade for us. They were helping us get to our shade garden goal. And just as a reminder, that was the before. And then here's the after. Carpinus musclewood. So we really narrowed that grass down. We got down to the grass is the pathway. The grass is the flow. The grass is the visual reprieve, stillness between the wild and colorful and mixed up and planted. And we got our garden shed. Very tiny and cute. And then we have a little seating area where she can enjoy the space and look at her new little water feature. We got a little elevation with those plants behind it. And then this is when she sent me, she said, I added some things, but it looks great. So that's what I'm going to end on. So I'm about 30 minutes, and so plenty of time for questions, and I can go back to slides if we need to go back to slides.
Could you go back to the slide for the woodland shrubs?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't have mountain laurel, but mountain laurel's another one, but I think, I'm not sure what the talk is next month, but there's a lot of discussion of, our changing zones and how different plants are going to be more suited for this region, or different, they're changing their geographic locations because of our changing climate. So I still use rhododendron and mountain laurel in the Greenville area, but I'm cautious with it.
Sorry, why is that?
It just likes more of a mountainous environment. I feel like, especially if I'm in like the downtown Greenville area and we have more of a heat island effect. And so that's going to be very dependent on the microclimate of the home as far as kind of how comfortable I feel with that. Yes,
That one in the bottom middle, is that related to dog hobble?
it is. Yes,
But
it
it's a
is.
hybrid that's, colorful.
Yes, it's a variegated hybrid that comes out with kind of a pinkish red tinge, and then has the mottled leaves, and it's called Rainbow. And there's also one called Scarlata, and those are both available on the market, and you can get standard dog hobble. It is, I should say, it is a neurotoxin, so it is called dog hobble for that reason. So, cautious of your use if you have pets, and they're very curious pets.
I always thought it was because when you're walking in the woods, there might be snakes hiding and they might bite your dog.
Yeah.
cause your dog to fall.
No, or it's so brambly in its natural environment that you could get caught in it and couldn't, hobble. But I'm British.
I actually read in a wildflower book that it was called dog hobble because when hunters were going, their dogs couldn't actually get through it or something.
But
So there's all kind of reason.
Yeah, but I've had a lot of clients that have been very cautious about poisonous plants, toxic plants toxic to dogs, and that is definitely on the list. And I was like, oh, I had that exact same understanding of it, but I read that it is a neurotoxin.
And you said red anise, you mean you said
Florida anise, red anise, or Florida anise, Illicium floridanum. And then the middle one is, it's still a red anise, but the variety is Florida Sunshine. There's also a yellow anise as well, but this is the Florida Sunshine anise with that chartreuse color.
go up and down one, I'm not sure which one has had the project.
Okay,
That, what is that?
it's a Baptisia. Yeah. Rick planted that one himself. That's why it looks so good. It's a big one. Yeah, and honestly, what species it is, that's an old project. That's an old project. That's, I think that was done right when I came on 16 years
That
ago.
all happened in 1 year.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's what they call a fork.
Yes, and so dies back to the ground, and yeah,
Nothing there in the winter time. So all that.
Yeah. one season. Yeah, it's an amazing plant. Aggressive self-seeder. Yeah, yeah.
Talk about red, Eastern red.
Okay, so Eastern Red Cedar is one of our great screening evergreens. There are a few varieties that we use. The Burkeye, which my friend Diane might have some knowledge about, which we planted in her house many years ago. And that has more of a bluish tinge, and that spreads more than the cultivar, the Brody, which is more of a yellow green, and it's a little tighter in its growth habit, more narrow, doesn't spread as much, because an old Eastern Red Cedar will self-limb, be a trunk, massive canopy. And so again, they've selected these specific cultivars to be smaller and more compact over time. Mostly, we were talking about how big hers has gotten over the past nine years.
It's
Wide,
They've
yeah.
stayed the right height, but they've just gotten wider.
Yeah, very broad. Anything else particularly?
No, I was, what struck me, years and years ago, we rescued some from land.
Mhm.
We planted these couple of feet up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they were full of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've often thought maybe like a hundred. Keep planting them. I thought we should.
Most primary issue that I think people have with it is the cedar apple rust that we planted them with hawthorns, and the hawthorns are susceptible to the cedar apple rust as well as apples. So a lot of apple farmers, don't want junipers, cedars, eastern red cedars, which is a juniperus, anywhere near their properties. So I think maybe they just generally have a bad rap because of that. But as a screening material for full sun, they're excellent. And my large screening material for shade is American holly. Because it will
And the
take
wildlife value for these red cedars off chain.
bluebirds.
But trying to find those compared to leaves.
Oh, right, this availability. Yes.
Have some questions from Zoom.
Oh, yeah, great.
Have you tackled yards with kudzu, and can you just?
Yes. So the question was, have you tackled yards with kudzu? I will say that Rick has, more so than I have tackled my own yard with kudzu on a yearly ongoing basis. So that is a plant that I will use a woody brush killer with, not as a spray, but as a cut and paint application. So I personally track the vines back to the source where they're coming out, and there's a tuber underground. If you're feeling vigorous and want to dig up the tuber, that might be the best way to do it. But as Rick has shared with me, the Kudzu College, I believe, was the gentleman from Spartanburg who was like really aggressively attacking kudzu, and I mean would dig up these tubers that were massive. And so the stored energy in that tuber is going to send out more vines each season. And if you have to be consistent with attacking it. Now there's also goats, which if we are talking a massive infestation of kudzu, then using goats, I think might be something that I would consider. But on, once if you can do a first pass and get it under control, then which is what I was able to do in my woodland space that had it mostly on the edges where it was getting more sun. But I've traced them back, I cut, and then I use a paintbrush and directly apply an undiluted woody brush killer that translocates down into the tuber underground and reduces its viability, but it's probably still going to send up more shoots next year, and I'm going to do it again.
The dean of kudzu,
Mhm.
you like you are. He said, in the
Underground, if you could find the underground.
big-
Yeah.
He said, you could take a pruning saw and just saw, I can't remember, 25%.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat that for the people on
That's
Zoom.
funny.
So we're discussing a gentleman who was very well known for removing kudzu, and he was saying that if you can find that large underground corm and you cut off the top 25% to 33%, then that would be sufficient to kill that kudzu and it wouldn't be able to come back. So I'm just not digging enough, I guess. I'm just yeah. Yeah.
I have a similar problem with, what's that flower that everybody loves?
Wisteria, you have a problem with wisteria? Mhm.
should do the same thing.
Yes. And that, I mean, that's definitely a method to handle things with a woody stem. And the two things I attack are kudzu and poison ivy. And if I had wisteria, I would probably do the same technique. I feel like that it's much less, I mean, it's way better than any foliar application and spraying of something like that. And I mean, if you've got the ability to do it without any chemicals, and that's wonderful and the way to go, but sometimes it's hard to battle. And then another Zoom question.
You're planting these edges, are you planting trees, waiting for growth, and planting shrubs or understories and all the plants and flowers, or do you want?
So a lot of times we do the planting all at once for our clients that are really coming to us for a landscape revamp. Now, the problem that does create, like the last project that I shared, is the dream is the shade garden. And right now, today, in her garden, there is not enough shade to do that lush understory layer with the ferns and the spring ephemerals. So in a case like that, where you do need some growth of your upper story, then yes, you wait. And I think that all of these plants have lifespans. Large trees have longer lifespan than a small perennial. They naturally age out over time, and they're just different lifespans. So maybe we plant sun-loving perennials at the beginning of the project to give the space definition, to fill it up. But we know over time that those are going to even naturally find their niche within the space. Just like in a wild meadow, plants that like that higher moisture gradient are going to find those lower spots in the meadow, and the plants that want it dry are going to be on the higher ridges. So they will naturally move around the garden, and then could be transplanted later when the shade has developed and we want to underplant it. But a lot of times it's situationally dependent as well, but for the most part, we're definitely planting the larger things, maybe thinking that the perennial palette will change over time.
Yeah, you have to educate the client with this concept of succession. In the natural forest, if you take the lawn, let's say you're starting with a lawn, well, that's
Yes.
nothing, right? It's blank
Yeah.
canvas, so over time, you're gonna have different plants that like the sun, and then you're gonna have some more shade, then the big trees are gonna come, and you're gonna get
Yes.
more stuff.
It's
So
the-
you gotta
yes.
teach them that it's a long way, it's a long.
It
process.
is. Yeah, it's not static, you know? I think that was probably the most obvious yet shocking thing as a young designer. Interior designer gets to say, I'm done.
Yeah.
And it looks just like they want it to look. And we're like, oh, we gotta wait like 3 years. And can you please take care of it while we're waiting? So it looks awesome to photograph in 3 years when everything's filled out. So the temporal component of landscapes and the changes over time are something that I think, yeah, we do have to acknowledge, we have to work with and not fight.
And, you know, and the way I've always thought about it is, if your landscape stays the same, year in, year out, year in, year out, it's a failure. You know, landscape could evolve just like nature does.
We want the change.
That they're
Yeah.
want to change. And so you have to manage that expectation, keep them in some stage or the other, but just you have to accept the fact that they will change.
Yeah.
Take some questions
Yes,
here.
yes. How about you?
Sorry, I just have one, you know, so we had some damage during the lead, so, you know, we are looking at a different landscape, with losing a lot of large trees, so, you know, with the needing more support, like, sometimes I just don't know which plants, you know, I have ideas of what I want it to look like. Now, what could be the steps of having like a landscape help? Like, someone comes out, gives you a list of plants, you know, like, should you go to the nursery, like what kind of level of support?
Yeah. So the question was about levels of support and how individuals can make these changes to their landscape that they want. So of course, as we've kind of looked at today, there would be going through the full blown process with a designer, a landscape architect or a landscape designer that could guide you through all of it. And then I think that kind of down from that would be just a consultation. Let's walk and talk. We do that for people, so we can just kind of walk, look at it, throw out ideas. Maybe we kind of generate a list of names of plants while we're there together, and then you can take that and run with it. Alternatively, utilizing the resources like with the Native Plant Society, some of these plant lists that are provided that say, hey, these all grow together, these like the same culture and conditions. Then there is the cross-referencing of where do I find it? How do I get it? What size is it when it goes in? So there would be more homework on your end if you just kind of use the resources. Of course, lots of wonderful books on Southeastern native plants and local South Carolina native plants as well that are out there. But yeah, and I think there are a number of landscape designers in the upstate that could provide kind of different levels of service, from, the full blown plan to just let's walk and talk. Yeah. I mean, yes.
Thank you for having that. And I just moved to the upstate Colorado. So this might be more of a question. Curious. Something.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the question was, we have a situation where there is a home where the lawn comes all the way up to the foundation of the house. The first thing that goes through my mind is, gosh, how do you maintain that edge? Because yes, you're mowing beside the house, but then you have to take the weed eater, go along whatever that material is, be it brick or stone, and are you causing damage, with that repetitive hitting it with the weed eater? So I think that is one of the reasons that a lot of people do foundation plantings, that is common. And I personally, we use hardwood mulch around the foundations of the house. We definitely don't want the mulch to touch any siding and create any moisture barriers. So, but as long as we have kind of brick or stone on the bottom of the house, and we do use hardwood mulch up to it. Some people are very concerned about termites or bugs and just don't want that. So there are plenty of times when we have done a river rock band. But I will say that nature abhors a vacuum, and you have empty rocks, you have empty mulch, something is going to find its way in, and it might not be what you want. And so if you are to create a plant bed, then go ahead and get your plants in it so that they're out competing the things that you don't want in that space. But I would say having the grass up to the house, I think that's more common practice now than it has been in the past. Ultimately, I don't think it's hurting anything, but you could have a lot more fun and interest in your landscape. Is it grass? Yes.
You know a lot of foundation plant.
Related to that, last thing was that is like,
Yeah.
rules for
Yes, pulling weeds. Yes. No, we do not use landscape fabric as a practice. I think I have seen enough times when I've had enough clients call me and say, please take this out. I can't handle it anymore. Because, you put it down and it does work for a few years, but then as you mulch on top of it, that mulch breaks down into soil, and then the weeds grow in the newly formed soil on top of the landscape fabric. And those little rootlets of those weeds can pierce straight through that landscape fabric, then form a network underneath. So when you pull the weed, you pull up the entire area of landscape fabric. So I say that good mulch, thick mulch, is your best friend in the weed fight. But we just live in an area where everything likes to grow, so it's challenging. I've got one in the back. Yeah, did you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, yes. I am not a fan of brick clay on brick.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, we usually apply it between 3 to 4 inches, but as you do this with either you or any landscape contractor that is helping you with that, they do not apply 3 to 4 inches of mulch on the stem or crown of any plant. But that is the thickness that we put down on what we would consider a standard application of mulch. And sometimes you just need a top dress, which is a smaller thickness, more in that 2-inch range, depends. And over time, another issue that I feel like I see with older landscapes is you mulch and you mulch and you mulch and you mulch. And yes, there's some breakdown of that mulch at the bottom, but a lot of times we artificially elevate the areas and change drainage patterns over time. Obscure window wells if we had window wells. So sometimes we have to come in and kind of clear out some of that old mulch and that old buildup to put back mulch. But in general, a 3 to 4 inch application should usually obscure the clay enough that we don't have splash up onto the house. Yes.
One of the things that, first of all, I want to say they came out and did great consult and great design for me, and I really appreciate it because I'm not much of a gardener. And, but it's gone well. And I had just massive grass, and what I did was instead of landscape fabric, I put down layers of cardboard.
Yeah.
And then put the mulch on top of that, and that worked really well. And it's all, soon it will be time for me to, about 9 o'clock at night, go out, go fix a margarita, and then sit out on my deck and watch the lightning bugs. But we're not there before these two.
That's great.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
On West Fargo Road, right next to a little bodega.
Yes. Yep.
I'm sorry, I asked you so many questions.
No, it's okay.
I have trouble with grass growing into my flower bed. What kind of edging?
We use a variety of types, but we usually use a steel edging if we have a creeping grass that is aggressive. The steel edging will not completely stop grass from doing what grass does and creep through those rhizomes, but it reduces the amount that gets through, and it always gives you that edge to go back to. So even if you have somebody that helps you with your lawn maintenance and your bedding and your mulching, you know, because that's one of those things that I've seen in a lot of landscapes over time, is I'm sure those curves were great when they were put in, but slowly but surely they're kind of wonky, and this one went this way, and so you lose those shapes that you're originally creating, and that steel edging, so it gets sunken down into the ground some. It's not above, but it goes down to kind of stop those roots, but it just always gives you that nice clean line. We also use brick, we also use stone, but there's always a hierarchy of cost associated with those different materials. The other thing that you can do is you can rent a bedline edger, which creates a V trench along your bedline, and it really cuts out a lot of those cross roots from the grass. And then that makes the ones that are in the wrong place easier to pull up once they've kind of been severed. Yeah.
Another question for Zoom, what trees are large shrubs can I use to block neighbor's yard? Quick growing and large, park shade, woodland, and environment.
Okay, so we have a question about part shade, woodland edge environment needing large trees and shrubs to screen a neighbor's yard. The one that we mentioned earlier, the eastern red cedar. I mean, that's going to be one of your fastest growing native evergreens, because we get into American hollies. So those are great. They can take sun, they can take shade. They're very diverse. They're one of those very resilient plants that are going to stick around with us no matter what the climate does, locally. but they're slower growing. They're slower growing than the eastern red cedar. Another one that I like, and it's going to depend on kind of your moisture gradient, is the sweet bay magnolia, which is native a little further south, but it's an evergreen that's not as dense, but it is dense. Don't scowl at me, Frank Holloman. I see you. Is that not native enough? Not even native enough. No, I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing. But no, that's one of those, because there are a few of those that are not maybe endemic right here, but they're good plants. So we use those. And then I know a lot of people would use, I mean, the fallback is going to be those Leyland cypress, which we're just not going to recommend. I mean, I would use the eastern red cedar over that any day. But then also the other thing that you do is you also plant deciduous trees, because you're getting 8 months out of the year. It's working for you and providing that screening, even though it is deciduous. And if it drops its leaves in the winter, you're inside by the fireplace anyway, so it's fine.
How about the really tall grasses that stay in the winter, like mooney grass,
Well, yeah, you think we have some switchgrass? Yeah, there are some grasses.
Not real tall, but it make a visual barrier.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Oh, it will. Yeah, there's some grasses, and I like to leave them up all winter to get that structure out of them. And then, I mean, there are also things like Yopon holly. Switchgrass, if you kind of want the tall architectural, there are a few different varieties of switchgrass that get some good height to them. Say Indian grass, but it's not as robust, right? It doesn't feel as thick as like a switchgrass would feel, thick and tall. Question back here.
I have a bunch of red cedars on my property.
Mhm.
What I use is my hedge trimmer and just trim it in where I want it, and it fills all back in. It really looks sharp.
Okay. And that comment was that with the eastern red cedars, if they're getting too wide, that pruning is working well and kind of keeping them the width that we desire, and they are filling back in, because a lot of times with evergreens, once you prune them, if you prune them too heavy, then they just won't fill back out. But it probably that you've been doing it and they're kind of used to it, then that's definitely good. Yep. Zoom questions. Yep.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Someone said they put newspaper under the mold to last about a year. Is that okay?
Yes, I think that's okay. And cardboard and newspaper would work. If you want to split hairs on the toxicity of the ink, that's somebody else's job, not mine. I don't know. I can't answer that part, but I think cardboard would also work really well and give you a little bit more, it's a little more hefty.
Amazon started using paper tape on some of theirs.
Mm.
I go rate the trash.
Yeah.
The recycle bins.
And then last one here, have you dealt with jumping worms? Are they a huge problem?
I have not dealt with jumping worms. I feel like we had a pretty significant army worm infestation last year in the Greenville area, but they're attacking sod, and I don't know my worm types.
They're a jumping earthworm.
A
I think
jumping
they're Asia,
earthworm.
as I understand, and they will eat all the native. They're more north.
Okay. The hammerhead, I've heard of like that hammerhead worm, but that's a different one than the hammer spadehead. Yeah, that's different.
This isn't
Jump.
fairly new.
Okay, so I personally don't have any experience, but someone said that yes, they are a problem, and that they are eating our native earthworms, which sounds awful.
Well, the ones that are.
The ones that came over your red columns. But we don't have native. I'm not sure we have.
Well, they're very helpful, right? I mean, earthworms are very helpful little guys, so not native. You know, so there are some plants like that too, that maybe they aren't native, but they're still nice. Every now and then. Yeah. Great. Okay. Last question. All right, here we go.
Do you have a good source for very large return to be installed?
Yep. So do we have a source for very large mature trees to be installed that we trust? Yes. I feel like we've got a number of good wholesale growers around the upstate. However, they don't all sell retail, and it's also very challenging to manage very large trees on your own. You know, just how you set them. I mean, when we install what we call ball and burlap trees, which are grown in a open field and then dug for our particular job and application, wrapped in burlap, we use a skid steer or a mini excavator to lift those root balls and move them and set them in place safely. You don't want them to drop off of the back of a truck. You have to be careful with them, and they are very heavy and hard to manage on your own. So I would say you probably don't want to go with anything more than a 30-gallon containerized if you are just setting it by yourself or with some friends. I think that would probably be what most people could manage safely. But out of a 30-gallon, I mean, you can get a 5 to 6 foot tree, but if you want to go to a 10 foot, a 12 foot, a 14 foot, then I think you should probably call a professional. But yeah, and I would be happy to maybe have a further conversation about specifics on that if that person would like to shoot me an email. Oh, that was you. We can talk about it. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there are a number of sources, and there are some growers that actually do installation as well. So you can share that. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Let me make one quick announcement, folks. All right, just because I have to be up here. I can do it from over there. So if you don't mind helping out, a few people just help with the chairs, because we have to reset the room. You can leave about 10 chairs out. That's how they want us to reset the room. And then if you got a number to pick up a plant, just try to be orderly with your plants. Diane will help with that. And we thank you so much for being here. Got it. Take your snacks with you. Seeds on that side, plants back there. Thank you, guys. Uh-huh.
There was someone around this. Absolutely. We just stop.